The evidence behind Arceus' powers disappearing from the Pokemon world is found in the future where its creations lose control of their domains, where legendaries try to bear the burdens that they were never meant to carry, where we humans have already gone extinct. And to show you this, we have to start in the present day time. Lucian, the fourth member of the Sinnoh Elite Four, can sometimes appear in the Canalith City Library, the place where the myths and legends surrounding Arceus and the birth of the universe are stored. Here, he mentions something rather interesting to us. Lucian states that he was reading through an analytical tome on humankind. Within this book, a quote stood out to him. "It all began without humans. The end will also be without humans." The first part of this quote is undeniable. Humanity wasn't created at the dawn of the universe. Rather, they came far after. But the second part? It sounds like a philosophical musing at first, but given what we know and what I'm about to show you, I'm inclined to believe that this statement is true. Let us take a step outside of the cheerful plotlines that the mainline games tend to give us, and instead, let's look at the games where the Pokemon writers were given far more flexibility in showing us just how cruel the Pokemon world can be. We are first introduced to the world of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon by a mysterious voice, claiming that the world we are about to step into is one inhabited only by Pokemon. Saying this is an alternative universe where humanity never existed would be nice, but I can't. Your partner in Gates to Infinity tells you that humans don't exist anywhere but in fairy tales. Even Pancham in Super Mystery Dungeon says that humans are just a made-up concept in kids' stories. For beings as influential as humans to become old wife tales, there needs to be a gigantic gap of time between their extinction and the events of the games. This point is hammered in even further when the Rescue Team games reveal a hidden buried ruin halfway through the game's plot. The official Pokemon News has the following to say about it. Its site had been hidden by a crater of a meteorite strike in ancient times. The buried relic is thought to date back beyond recorded history. There are rumors of treasures, and perhaps even Pokemon that lived in ancient times. The moniker of Pokemon that lived in ancient times is often given to the fossil Pokemon, but that's not what we find in these ruins that were supposedly sealed in the ancient past. Here we can find Porygon and Porygon 2, Pokemon that were created by human researchers who brought code to life. Those aren't the only man-made Pokemon that can be found in the future of Mystery Dungeon though. We can also find Mewtwo, which was created by Team Rocket, and Pokemon like Trubbish as well as Banette, who adapted themselves to look like human-made objects. Finally, there's also the presence of the Coronet rock, which acts as a replacement for Mount Coronet's special magnetic field that usually would allow Probopass to evolve. This chunk here, thus, is likely a fragment of this very mountain, which means that this mountain here no longer exists in the future. And this brings us to something rather important: what stood upon Mount Coronet before it evidently disappeared here. According to ancient legends, Mount Coronet is where the Sinnoh region began. Arceus created Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina at its peak. After this taxing endeavor, it fell into an unending sleep on the highest peak of the mountain, hence why the Temple of Sinnoh was built there. This place acts as the connection between the Hall of Origin, Arceus' domain, and the earthly plane. If that bridge is gone, however, which it evidently is, since Mount Coronet no longer exists in the future of Mystery Dungeon, with only chunks of it being found here, then that also means that the true form of Arceus has been cut off from the universe it created. Sound too far-fetched for you? Well then, how would you explain the fact that the beings closest to Arceus are losing their grip on reality? Before I explain that to you though, allow me to introduce you to this video's sponsor, Arena Club. Arena Club is a website that allows you to open digital card packs starting at only $25. Every time you open one, there's also a small chance of you pulling a Grail card, which is worth 20 times of the original pack's price. The value of Arena Club though lies in the fact that each card that you pull from here is not only already graded, but after you pull it, you can decide to either sell it back to Arena Club at the fair market value, or you can send it straight to your home. Beside the regular packs, Arena Club also offers an assortment of specialty packs that rotate every 2 days. So if there's a specific card you're looking for, then I'd keep an eye on this. But as they say, seeing is believing. And since Arena Club has been super generous in allowing me to open a Ruby pack, I'll do just that now. Alright, let's see what I get this time. Drumroll, please. A Mew, alright, from 2021. It's a Sword and Shield pack, I think, too. And it's another Gem Mint 10, which means we can add it to our showroom. A place where not only you can enjoy your cards, but others can also. I already have one from the last pack I opened, so I'll be adding this one here as well. Your turn to rip. Get 20% off your first slab pack or card. Just go to arenaclub.com/amazed and use code AMAZED. Dialga and Palkia, the rulers of time and space, beings so fundamental to reality that Arceus created them before almost anything else. In the mainline games, these two are depicted as near untouchable forces, capable of warping the very fabric of the universe on a whim. So why, in the future of Mystery Dungeon, do they look so fragile? Let's start with Dialga. In the Explorer games, we learn that Dialga no longer governs time freely. Instead, it resides atop Temporal Tower, a structure whose sole purpose is to regulate the flow of time across the planet. And even that isn't enough. The tower itself is stabilized by objects called time gears, scattered across the world, each one keeping time flowing in its respective region. But hold on a minute. The Master of Time, the being who could once rewind, accelerate, and even freeze time across all dimension, now requires physical anchors just to keep its own domain from falling apart. That wasn't a thing before. Dialga never needed these crutches. But what even happens when these time gears are removed? Well, Dialga loses itself entirely. Its mind collapses alongside its domain, twisting it into a feral, mindless creature driven purely by self-preservation. Primal Dialga, a god that's reduced to an animal. Dialga no longer controls time in this state. Instead, it's now time that controls Dialga. The relationship between the two has inverted entirely. We can actually see this reversion happen in the games themselves. The Mystery Dungeon games have something called the IQ system, which, yes, just stands for how intelligent a Pokemon is. During the mainline story, we fight Dialga while it's still in the process of turning into this primal abomination. Here, it has 600 IQ, being able to use more complicated battling maneuvers. During the after story, though, we meet it again. This time, it's been long corrupted. Now, its IQ is set at 26. Pretty interesting, right? But what about its counterpart? Well, its situation might be even more embarrassing. In the same Explorer games, Darkrai, a Pokemon that Palkia should outclass in every conceivable way, manages to manipulate the ruler of space like a puppet. Darkrai convinces Palkia that the player and their partner are the ones distorting space. And Palkia believes it without even a second thought. But it gets worse. Darkrai then infiltrates the spatial rift, Palkia's own domain, and traps it inside a nightmare. The ruler of space is rendered helpless in the one place it should hold absolute power. Can you imagine Palkia from the present time, the being that Cyrus wanted to use in order to remake our entire universe from scratch, being laid to shame by a nightmare? I can't. Furthermore, just like Dialga, Palkia also no longer wields its domain of space very effectively. The things that we know as mystery dungeons are places where the layout of physical space shifts and rearranges itself every single time you enter. Space is constantly folding and scrambling at random everywhere. In a world where Palkia held firm control over its domain, these places didn't exist. But they do now. The world is riddled with open wounds in space itself, and Palkia is either unable or too weakened to close them. Both of them are losing their grip, and without their creator's power flowing through the world, it's only a matter of time before they lose it completely. And they aren't the only ones. With Arceus' influence on the world weakening, we can see other legendary Pokemon step up to bear the brunt of the burden it used to carry. Or try to, at least. In Super Mystery Dungeon, we can discover something called the Tree of Life. We're told that it surfaced a long time prior to the game's events. The reason for its appearance is never really given to us though, directly at least. This tree is actually Xerneas. Unlike the small form in which we see it in within the mainline games, the scale of it is far grander here. But why? What would have caused Xerneas to jump to such a drastic measure as to become the sole source of life in the Pokemon world? Previously, Xerneas could bestow life, but it always stayed in balance alongside Yveltal, the legendary Pokemon that controls death. Now though, these two are extremely unbalanced, right? Well, no, actually. Zygarde hasn't intervened here, which means that life and death are still at balance. How can that be though if Xerneas is emitting so much more life energy? Well, since Yveltal is still seen in its small form here, it suggests that it isn't exuding more decay than it usually would be, which means that the amount of life energy in the world was actually reduced, making Xerneas compensate for it by transforming into the Tree of Life. See where I'm getting at with this? With Arceus' power being cut off from the world, Xerneas was left to bear the burden alone. We can further see that through the fact that Pokemon evolution no longer happens when you reach a certain level. Here in the future, we need to visit the Tree of Life or certain hotspots throughout the world in order to be granted the Light of Evolution, a fragment of Arceus' power that no longer permeates the land. But what does this future feel like to live in? Gates to Infinity answers that question, and the answer is despair. So much despair, in fact, that it takes physical form. At the heart of the Great Glacier, in a place called the World Core, sits the Bittercold, a crystal born from the accumulated negative emotions of the world's Pokemon. Once it grows large enough, it will freeze the entire world over and end everything. Which brings us to Kyurem. Kyurem stands guard over the Bittercold. When the player and their friends make their way to the World Core to destroy the crystal, it's Kyurem who blocks their path, declaring that the world's destruction is already decided, that fighting fate is meaningless, and that everything ends here. And to prove how serious it is, Kyurem does something almost unthinkable. It strikes down Hydreigon. Okay, yeah, that doesn't sound super serious, but let me explain. Hydreigon in this game isn't really Hydreigon, it's the voice of life, an avatar sent out by the Tree of Life itself. And if you have been paying attention, you know exactly what the Tree of Life is. That's Xerneas. The same overburdened Xerneas already carrying the weight of the entire world's life force alone. And now it personally has to also intervene to stop the apocalypse, because there is no one else left. No other legendary Pokemon chose to help. And that's why the Voice of Life doesn't summon any other legendary or an army or anything from within this world's time. It summons a human. The world of Pokemon ended humanity's story long ago, and yet, when that world stood at the edge of its own ending, a human was the only thing that could pull it back. Perhaps it's the bond that humans and Pokemon used to share that actually held off the world's destruction. Which finally brings us back around to the events of Super Mystery Dungeon. Here we once again see something eerily similar to what happened in Gates to Infinity. Dark matter is an entity born from the accumulated negative emotions of the world's Pokemon, but where the Bittercold merely wanted to freeze the world over, dark matter has a far more ambitious goal, dragging the entire planet into the sun. But dark matter isn't the interesting part here. What's interesting is who shows up to fight it, because for the first time ever, we see Arceus intervene personally. Sure, we see a semblance of that in Legends Arceus, but even there, it acted through a human proxy, pulling one across time and letting them do the work in its stead. It never stepped onto the battlefield itself. Here, of all times though, it does. Things have finally gotten bad enough that the legendary Pokemon now rally under Arceus' banner, buying us, a human, the time we need to defeat dark matter. And this, dear viewer, is where I need to point out another uncanny ability that dark matter has. It can turn Pokemon to stone permanently, and it does so to everything that stands against it. Yes, even to Arceus. But how is that even possible? How does Arceus lose? Well, remember when I talked about Mount Coronet? The bridge between the Hall of Origin and the earthly plane that was, well, reduced to scattered fragments? It's likely that the Arceus that faces dark matter here isn't the original one in its full glory. Rather, it's one of its severed hands, a fragment cut off from its own domain, running on whatever power still lingers in the world, which, as Xerneas' transformation into the Tree of Life has shown us, isn't much. The only reason the world survives is because the Voice of Life reached beyond it and pulled a human into the future.